Years ago, I heard a very amazing story that took place in my family. When I was working on my graduate degree, I had to take a class called Family of Origin. And in that class, our professor instructed us to do a genogram and go back as far as you could possibly go. Now, given that I'm an African American and I come from an African American family, the poor records kept in the slave days made it very, very difficult for me to go and find records about my family and find things about the past of my family. So I decided to talk to my grandmother, who was like the family historian, and I interviewed her. I'll never forget, it was such an amazing conversation. I was always close to my grandmother, but this was probably my favorite conversation. We talked for hours on the phone, filling out this genogram. My grandmother was like the link from the past of my family to the present day. My grandmother was born in the 30s in a place called Chula, Mississippi, which is where my family is from, which is the origin of my family. Again, due to the slave days, we were deep in the American South. Years later, in the 40s or 50s, my grandmother and her family migrated to Chicago from Mississippi, which is a very common thing. There are several books about that migration. My grandmother was in that migration, and she talked about her family, and she talked about, you know, what it was like to grow up in Chula, Mississippi. My grandmother's from a very large family. She had 8 or 9 siblings. But one story really impacted me. One story really touched me. I wanted to know, what was it like in those difficult days in the American South, and how did they escape? It was very not safe for a lot of African American families. So how did the family stay safe? And my mother told me this story about her father, a guy by the name of Haston Williams was his name. And Haston, my grandmother's father, was walking home one day, and these 2 white men began to harass him, referring to him as boy and demanding a response. My great-grandfather, very proud man, would not respond to being called a boy and just continued walking home. And they continued calling him a boy, and he continued walking home. When he got home, he closed the door in their face, which was a very disrespectful thing to do in the 30s and 40s in Chula, Mississippi, to an African American to 2 white men. So they went and got a group of people to come to my great grandfather's house, and with violent intention. I mean, like a lynch mob, an actual lynching, and the intent to drag my grandfather out of the house, and those things usually ended in deadly and violent ways. They usually ended in the destruction of the house and property. I mean, it was a really scary thing. My grandfather, seeing this crowd of people collecting outside of front of his home, got a gun, got his rifle, and went and met the mob. And he said, "You guys may get me, but I'm going to take some of you with me." And this caused the mob to hesitate, caused them to be hesitant, and they couldn't believe that this man was standing up to them to this degree, and they dispersed and they went away. And from that point forward, they began to refer to my great-grandfather as Crazy Haston, and they left his children alone and referred to them as, "Those are Crazy Haston's children." And for the rest of the time in Mississippi, my great-grandfather's children, my grandmother, were all safe up until the time when they left and headed to Chicago. And I remember hearing that story and just being so touched and moved that I was related to someone that was capable of such strength and character and bravery and courage. And I remember thinking just how amazing that was. And I think now, so you might be listening to this story thinking, like, what on earth does this have to do with solution-focused brief therapy? Well, to me, everything, actually. Because one of the most understated skills in solution-focused brief therapy is listening, is hearing. I read a quote today that says, people start to heal the moment they feel heard. And you have to remember, man, that everybody that you meet, everybody comes into your office, everybody comes in contact with, they come in carrying a diverse and amazing story. And we live in a world right now that I think is struggling quite a bit with diversities, and how do we deal with people who are different from us? How do we deal with communities and cultures, different genders, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, nationalities, socioeconomic statuses? And we have a tendency to judge them and to look down upon them and to be critical, but I think we need to listen for the story. I think we need to listen for the hero in the story. Because I promise you, every story of problem, every story of trauma, every story of tragedy, there's a hero in that story. And one of the great things about solution-focused brief therapy is we get to listen for the hero in that story. And all of a sudden, I remember talking to my grandmother and realized there was a hero in my family story. And you know, we struggle with this in this world. Even in the solution-focused community, we struggle with this. Diversity issues are real and they're present. The associations, organizations, and conferences in this very field struggle with how to treat people with different ideas, different backgrounds, different skin tones, different ethnicities, nationalities, ages. But we have to rise above that and remember that everybody comes into contact with us with a story. And it's our job to hear the story and not be judgmental, not be diagnostic, but just be a genuine, true listener. You know, one of the most important skills, and I've said this a gabillion times, one of the most important skills in solution-focused brief therapy is the ability to build your next question. In fact, I would say that that's all solution-focused brief therapy is, the ability to build the next question. But rooted in that skill is the ability to hear what your client is saying and the ability to hear the hero in their story and think of them as a hero. And I think too often, when people say things that are hard to hear or that are so different from us or that we even don't want to hear, we have a tendency to judge what we've heard. We have a tendency to diagnose what we've heard. We have a tendency to distance ourselves and be uncomfortable by what we heard. And I want you to celebrate it. I want you to really, really listen for the hero in the story, even if it's not a fun, wonderful, amazing story. Find the hero. Because in the story of the American South, which is a very troubling, traumatic story, there's the hero story of Haston Williams, which I am fortunate enough to be related to. I mean, that's right, my great grandfather. And the next time I saw my grandmother after having that conversation through tears, my grandmother told me I'm just like him. You know, my grandmother passed away a few years ago, but I've never received a compliment more touching than that one. So I want you to remember that no matter what, it's your job to hear the hero. And not only your client stories, I want you to think broader than that. If there's one thing this world needs more of, I think it's more listening for hero in people with different stories and different backgrounds, because we're struggling with it right now. We're struggling with it in the field of solution-focused brief therapy. We're struggling with it in the world. We're struggling with it everywhere. And if that truly is what leads to healing, and I believe that it does, then we have to hear people's hero stories. We owe every single person we meet that, especially the people who come to us for our service. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. You know, I really thought long and hard. I actually even called my business partner and I said, you know, I got something on my heart and I'm kind of nervous to share it, and she encouraged me to go ahead and do it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, share, and comment below. I love you guys so much, and thank you for listening to the story. I'd love to hear your story. Leave a comment below. Like it, share it, help me spread these words as always. And never forget, you're just one question away from making a difference in someone's life. I'll see you in the next video.